Before we begin, you must understand that everything you are about to read is absolutely true, and the events continue to this day. It was last summer. My girlfriend, now wife, and I finally made the big decision to move in together. Cobblestone Square is a situation of apartment complexes surrounding a central park. After living in another apartment for 2 years, I learned that a bigger apartment was opening up on the other side of the complex. We needed more space because my wife had 2 children from a previous marriage. After a rushed inspection, we were happy to move in right at the start of June. The months passed by and the days grew shorter and colder. Autumn was drawing to a close, and with it, that's when the trouble began. In all the stories and movies, it starts out small. Things moving from place to place, lights being left on, etc., all chalked up to forgetfulness. This was true in our case, and we didn't think much of it. It only started to escalate with the children. Our apartment is set up with 2 bedrooms and bathrooms on opposite ends from each other. In our bedroom, we have our own private bathroom, and next to the kids' room is a small hallway leading to their own bathroom. We would give them baths in there and potty train, and almost as if flicking a switch, when the autumn months came, our youngest, a 2-year-old girl, would absolutely hate going in that bathroom. At the mere mention of bath time, she would go into hysterics, or on good days, she would sit in the tub, and in the process of bathing, she would look past myself or my wife and start screaming and crying. Oftentimes something would catch her eye in the mirror, and she would also start crying like mad. The most unsettling part would be that as soon as we took her out of the bathroom, she would stop and act as if nothing had happened. Our son, who was 4 at the time, would also run up to us and say that he would hear a voice saying, "Uppy," which was a common saying among the children when they wanted to be held. We asked if it was his sister, and he would profusely say that it wasn't, but he said it sounded like a kid. This happened a few times. With my wife being separated from her first husband and splitting custody, we would have the children come live with us every other week. On the weeks that the kids would go stay with their dad, the activity would seem to die down, but that didn't mean that it wouldn't happen at all. I asked my wife what she remembered from last year, and she recounted a time when we didn't have the children and she was cleaning the house. She noticed the kids' door was open. We usually keep it closed, but she thought maybe I had went into their room for something. She checked to see if I was inside, and seeing that I wasn't, she closed the door and didn't really think anything of it. It wasn't until a while later that she went to use the kids' bathroom and saw that the door was open again. She found me in our room and asked if I had opened it, and I said that I hadn't. With more incidents of lights being found on and doors opening, it all came to a head near the end of October when I was washing dishes in the kitchen. Above the sink, facing the living room, is a small window that allows someone in the kitchen to look out into the dining room and the living room, and additionally the back door, which is a sliding glass door. Important detail. After the kids had been put to bed and were asleep, my wife and I went about our normal duties and chores, trying to finish up before the next day started. As I was washing dishes, I looked up from the sink and saw in the glass of the sliding glass door the reflection of a large shadow in the hallway to the kids' bedroom. It quickly entered the bathroom, and I immediately walked over, turning on the light, and seeing nothing there. I went to my bedroom where my wife was vacuuming, and I asked her if she by chance went into the kids' bathroom for whatever reason. I wasn't surprised by her response when she said no, and I told her what I had seen. It was after this event, and subsequently Halloween, that all the activity seemed to stop. More months passed by again, and we jumped to 2020. August. As soon as the activity started again, I began to keep a journal of all the findings. That way there was a record. On August 10th, I went to the bathroom, the kids' bathroom, before going to bed, and heard a small child giggle. Both children were fast asleep. On August 11th, my wife was bathing our daughter, and for the first time in a year, our little girl started to shriek in fear until she was out of the bathroom. On August 13th, while getting ready for bed, our son knocked on our door. I'm always the one to answer, and he told me that he was afraid. He wouldn't elaborate on why, but when I laid him down in his bed, he begged for the closet to be closed. The closet has never been a problem, and a few nights after this we returned to it being opened and haven't experienced anything like it again. On August 15th, my wife and I had an argument, and I went out to the couch to sleep for the night. As I was tossing and turning, I heard a child's voice in the night say, "Uh-huh," as if answering a question. I didn't react, and forced myself to go back to sleep. Both myself and my wife have caught our son speaking to himself as well. My wife told me that once she heard him saying, "Ow, stop it, you're hurting me." And when she went to go check on him, he was in the hallway by the kids' bathroom, holding his arm. During the daytime, the kids were playing, and both me and my wife were doing our own thing. As I was sitting on the couch, our son runs behind the couch and stops, and then says, "And how would you do that?" out of the blue. I turn to him and ask him who he's talking to, and after a moment's hesitation, he says, "Nobody." I told him I heard him say something, and he then insisted that he didn't say anything. On one occasion, my wife was sleeping on the couch, and in the middle of the night heard a man's whisper say, "Don't get up," to which she promptly obeyed. It was the night after that I woke up from my sleep in bed to see a shadow shape standing over me with piercing red eyes. I felt as if it was going to hurt me. My wife and I have naturally begun our interest in the spiritual world. We began researching and looking for ways to go about this. We've purchased a Ouija board with no results, and from a medium, a supposedly haunted ring. If our apartment was going to be haunted, we wanted to know by who and with what intention. It seems as if our mail-order ghost has already made their home, as one morning our front door was unlocked and slightly ajar, with nothing stolen. Tonight, as I write this, my wife and I were watching TV on the couch and decided to call it an evening. But as we got to our bedroom, I noticed a low scratching sound coming from the record player. I opened it up and saw that the turntable was moving as the needle was off its holder, turning the record player on. I replaced the needle and tried knocking the player a few times to see if it could have been easily bumped or knocked off, but no. The only way to move that needle was to pick it up with your fingers and set it down. I was reminded of one other time that this happened, long before we bought any haunted items. I am thoroughly convinced that my apartment is haunted. People die in them way too often to think it's not a possibility, and if nobody died here, the cemetery across the road definitely doesn't bring me any comfort. I can say that two distinct entities can be somewhat accounted for, a small child ghost and something else. Or maybe something that wants to be viewed as a child, but let's think happy thoughts. We still live here to this day. Autumn is just beginning, and that's when things really seem to get interesting. The story I'm about to tell you takes place including myself, my mother, and my younger sister. We were in St. Francisville, Louisiana, staying at the infamous Myrtles plantation. I'm aware that when it comes to touristy haunted places, the paranormal events that may occur there are questionable regarding the issue of their validity. As such, I tend to err on the side of caution with my own beliefs, and I always do a thorough check of wherever I'm staying. I keep a lookout for artificial motors, wires, basically anything that can cause things to happen that may seem paranormal. The cabin that we stayed in was clear. We arrived at the plantation around 2 p.m. that first day. We were given a complimentary tour of the grounds. I was getting vibes all over the place. It was pretty insane from the moment that I stepped foot on that soil, to be honest. I state the bit about getting vibes with emphasis on the fact that I do get vibes. Sometimes. Rarely. And never that strong. After the tour was finished, we were shown to our rooms, we were let in, and left to our own devices. I did my evaluation on the room, then afterward noticed that any time I neared the back door, I picked up on energy even more strongly than I had been during the tour of the rest of the grounds. I just felt that something had happened there, and I knew that I had to find out what. It was about 5 p.m. by that point, and understandably, we were getting pretty hungry. We left the plantation to go into town and get some dinner. We got back around 6:30, and were walking back over to our cabin when a friendly woman that we'd seen earlier walked over to us. She asked if we wanted to see her room. It was located in the actual plantation house, whereas we were staying in what would have originally been one of the slave cabins. We said yes, of course. So she took us up there. We looked around, and at first there was nothing noticeable as far as feelings or energy goes. Then I went into the bathroom. It was the most awful, oppressive atmosphere in there. It was creepy and terrible, and I hated it instantly. I just wanted to leave. I didn't necessarily think that something had happened there, rather that something inhabited that space. And I knew that it was not something kind. We didn't stay very long. Maybe 15-20 minutes later, we went back to our cabin and settled in for the night. Lots of vibes in that cabin, and my sister and I, we were somewhat younger at the time, shared a bed because we were scared. We stayed up late playing a game. When midnight rolled around, we decided that it was probably best to put it away and go to bed. As soon as we had put the game up and silence set in, however, I noticed a sound. The rocking chair on the front porch was creaking as it moved. Backward, forward, backward, forward. Hard enough that I could be certain that the wind was not responsible. I freaked out a little bit, but decided that I wasn't going to mention it to my sister. It would probably just scare her. We laid down for the night. She got to sleep quick. I, on the other hand, was having sleep issues. Nothing but thoughts and worries running through my mind. The moment I heard footsteps on the stones outside of our cabin, though, all of those pesky voices became irrelevant. Keep in mind, our cabin was fenced in, so it couldn't have been anyone who didn't have the key. Regardless, I heard the footsteps, and they continued as I heard the light slapping sounds of feet on the wooden porch along with the groan of someone's weight. They continued forward, right through the door, and I heard as whoever it was passed right by my bed. The whole time, I saw nothing. The footstep sounds made their way across the room to the wall, then out the back door. I will say that while I saw nothing, I did smell something. It was as though someone were wearing rosehip perfume, trailing the scent along behind them everywhere they walked. This event took place at about 1 a.m. Already having trouble getting to sleep, I didn't rest until 2.5 hours later, approximately 3:30 a.m. When we got up the next day, we went into the main house for breakfast, where we heard stories from other campers about their experiences. Theirs were equally intriguing, including people who felt a presence sit down on their bed in the middle of the night, and a person coming out of a cabin to tell people to be quiet. Yet the cabin in question was totally devoid of anyone alive. We ate, shared our stories, and returned to our cabin. We sat there for a while playing games on our tablets, just relaxing really, as it was a nice room despite its history and the fact that it was haunted. I can't remember why, but my sister and mom got into an argument. The disagreement obviously didn't sit well with whatever spirits were occupying the cabin, because they were both interrupted by the faucet in the bathroom being turned on full force and then back off again. It startled all three of us. We cleared out of the cabin in less than 30 seconds after that. That is the end to my Myrtle's Plantation story. I am never going to forget how terrifying that it was to be awake by myself in a cabin in the middle of nowhere and suddenly realize that you are not alone. I swear up and down that this story, as much as it sounds like it's a made-up, run-of-the-mill scary doll story, it is 100% true and still terrifies me. When I was a kid, I would spend a lot of time in Texas with my brother and stepmom, mainly just my brother and stepmom because my dad was in the military, and would frequently go on long trips, leaving us alone in whatever house that we happened to be living at the time. When I was about 5, we moved to a very large, old Victorian house. It had 3 stories, not including the attic and the basement, lots of rooms, and as a little kid I found it was very fun to explore. In the attic, there was a ton of old junk that the owner of the house was storing while we were renting it, including a huge collection of beautiful, handcrafted porcelain dolls. There were hundreds of them lined up neatly on the back wall in a glass case, standing on their little stands like an army ready for command, and as a little girl who loved ribbons and bows and anything girly, I was entranced. One doll in particular stood out to me. It had beautiful red hair. It was a green-eyed doll in a blue silk dress with a matching ribbon. I begged my dad to let me play with her. I felt like I needed to hold and love her and have tea parties with her. He of course refused, saying that the dolls were worth more than I could imagine and that he wanted his deposit back when we moved. He kept the door locked for good measure after catching me more than once staring in awe at the doll. A month went by and I had all but forgotten about her, choosing to simply explore the house and play in my basement room with my Barbies. That is until one day when I came home from dropping my dad off at the base and found the red-haired doll sitting on my bed. I was ecstatic, thinking that my dad had given me the doll and left it as a surprise, so I proceeded to play with the doll every second of every day until my dad came home. As soon as my dad saw the doll, he flipped out and yelled at me, spanked me, and took the doll away to lock back up in the basement, and only got more aggravated when he discovered that the attic door was still locked, and he was the only one to have the key. He couldn't figure out how I could have possibly picked the lock, and re-picked the lock, to lock it back. His solution was that I had somehow convinced my brother to do it for me. Another month went by and my dad installed another lock on the attic, warning me and my brother what would happen if he found out that we had been in there again while he was gone. That very night, when we returned home, the doll sat on my bed again, leaving me wary of its presence. Something that had once made me so happy now made me cautious and anxious. I told my stepmom, who immediately became angry and slapped me, and then my brother, and tried to return the doll, only to find the attic door, once again, locked. She tore the house apart trying to find the keys that she was positive we had hidden until giving up and locking the doll in her room. The night my dad came home, I was terrified. He wouldn't speak to me or my brother at all. He only gave a short speech about how we needed to go to our rooms and not come out. The next trip he made, we didn't see him off to the base. We sat in our rooms and had a quiet evening alone. I spent the night sulking and trying to figure out how the doll had gotten back into my room. Later, after I had fallen asleep, I heard soft music box sounds that slowly woke me up. I felt something near my feet, and thinking it was my cat curled up, I reached down, only to find, instead of fur, a handful of hair. I turned on my light and screamed. What looked like every doll from the attic was in my room. They were sitting at my tea table on my dollhouse and positioned in standing position on my bed and in various parts of my room.
My door slammed open, and my dad appeared in the doorway where he had apparently been waiting for me to head to the attic to claim a doll. He took one look at them, grabbed me, and ran out of the house, dragging my brother and stepmom along with us. He refuses to speak of them to this day. The most important part of the story is the backstory of the red-haired doll. Apparently, the original builder and owner of the house had a daughter who died when she was about 8, and it was customary to make a doll of their likeness made out of their real hair and dressed in the same clothes that the child had worn. I think it was that little girl, because I have never felt like it was dangerous to play with the doll. I just felt like she was lonely and wanted to make a friend. I woke up this morning to some disturbing news. My wife and I sleep in different rooms, mainly because I snore a lot and I also toss and turn due to spinal issues. It works out best for us. Lately, I've been going to bed around 4 a.m. since I'm out of a job and I prefer the quiet of the night. My wife usually gets up anywhere between 5 to 6 a.m. if the cats are bugging her, to give them a little something until feed time. Don't ask me why, it's just what she does. Anyway, this morning after I woke up, she said as she walked past my room, she saw a shadow figure sitting on the corner of my bed, staring at me, and that my iPod was on. She also said she knew I was sleeping because I was snoring. Now, I usually watch something on my iPad before going to sleep, but I also keep my door mostly closed so that the light from the iPad doesn't disturb her. If she saw me, it means the door was open, as it would have been impossible otherwise. Now, that part doesn't disturb me too much. We have 4 cats, and it's not out of the ordinary for them to push the door open. What I know 100% for a fact is that I had the door mostly closed, and the iPad was definitely in sleep mode. I always put my iPad in sleep mode, and then put my phone on the charger prior to going to sleep. My door creaks, so I would have heard it open if I were still up. This is disturbing to me because it isn't the first time a shadow man was spotted by my wife, and I spotted one before meeting her. Back in either 2008 or 2009, I was living in my first apartment. I had the scariest experience of my life. I woke up sleeping on my chest, which I never do, and I found my entire body was paralyzed. The only thing I could move was my eyes. Out of the corner of my left eye, I could see a shadow figure approaching me. I tried screaming, but nothing came out. I started to panic, and before I could do anything, everything went blank, and I woke up in the morning. I usually forget most of my dreams, but this event is scared into my brain. The last bit of information I want to share is something that seems odd to me, but I don't really know how to explain it. It's only happened twice in my room over the last 3 years. What I've seen is this strange, tan-colored dust that appears out of nowhere in a small area. The 2 times it happened, it wasn't in the same area, and oddly, the areas around the dust only have the typical normal dust buildup. I've checked the ceiling to see if anything came out from there, and found nothing. It's strange to me because, while I'm not a clean freak, the amount of dust makes it look like it's been building up over months, which, for that, wouldn't be the case. This may have had nothing to do with anything, but I thought it was worth mentioning. I've watched documentaries on sleep paralysis and read some medical reports. I don't know if it is or isn't a medical condition, but what gets me is that people from all over the world with various beliefs have experienced the exact same thing. Always the inability to move one's body, and always a single or multiple shadow figures.
Honestly, I don't think I've ever experienced paranormal activity in terms of seeing something. But ever since I was a kid in my childhood home, I was really scared, almost traumatized of seeing something or hearing something in the dark at night. No specific reason for it. I would just stare at the door frame of my room, which was always opened at night, and wait for something to show. I never even liked horror movies, and even now at 21 I avoid them because I know they freak me out, so I don't believe that the fear came from the movies. The thing is, I moved to a different city when I was 18 years old and changed a few apartments until now, and in every single one of them, I felt chills. Everything is fine, and then comes a certain time of night when it's like the energy in the room changes, and I have a feeling that someone is watching me. I always believed that if I could convince myself not to believe in spirits, or that the paranormal is real, then I can escape from that, and nothing weird will happen to me if I don't believe or give it attention. Am I right? But here we are. I started to think, what if the cold, watching feeling and fear I get every night is related to some childhood trauma that I might not remember? Fast forward to today. My boyfriend and I moved back to his parents' house after the lockdown. We have a separate upper apartment for ourselves, and no one but him ever lived there. We have spent so many months and nights here before, and really the apartment never gave me any chills. Until the last month or so. So lately I have this really bad vibe in this place, especially at night. It can be dark outside around 6 p.m. or 10 p.m. and everything is super. Then there just comes this time, after midnight, when the air in the room changes and I feel like something negative has entered. The whole energy is negative, and the feeling of someone looking at me returns. Most of the time I'm scared to have my eyes opened, that I might see something. He doesn't feel the same thing and says it's because of the stress and anxiety. And true, it might just be paranoia, and I'm going crazy. But I had several nights when I really did feel like something was messing with me. I would wake up with the sensation like someone had pushed me, and my boyfriend was dead asleep. I would have sleep paralysis and again would have a feeling like someone is poking me and hear banging noises that weren't there. I was sleepless for a few nights, and then I started taking Xanax just to make me fall into deep sleep to get some rest. When I am able to sleep, there's that time before falling into sleep when I feel the most vulnerable because of the dark and the dead silence. There are radiator noises and downstairs noises, which, by the way, are loud footsteps even in the middle of the night. And sometimes I would ask them if they were awake at the time, and they said they were sleeping. But still, I kind of comfort myself with the idea of it just being normal house noises. The worst thing is going to the bathroom at night. I have bladder issues, so it's normal for me to go at 1, 2 a.m. Don't know why, but I noticed this pattern. And often, I'm just terrified. I use my phone as a flashlight and practically run there. If I can hold it, I do, because that's how scared I am of the negative energy in the air. I'm so afraid of seeing a shadow or a face staring at me. It's like I know that something is present, but I'm unable to give it shape or form. Sometimes it's like I can sense someone's breath on my face. Never thought I would write something like this because it is the opposite of ignoring the problem and convincing myself that I am imagining. But I'm not sure what to do anymore. Every night I lay in my bed, and in just moments the air in the room switches to negative, cold, and spooky. I can't live like this. It's stressing me out so much, and I just want to know if it makes any sense. Am I crazy and too paranoid so that I just imagine all of this? Or could it really be that something is there? I have had many paranormal experiences throughout my life. I'm a spiritual person and have always been interested in the supernatural. This particular experience took place when I was 13. My mom, dad, sister, and I had to move because of my dad's work. This time, we were bound for Florida. At first, things at our new house were great. Then, a few weeks later, things started to occur. Our belongings were being moved from one place to another, for example. Next, I heard whispers and other inexplicable sounds. My family began hearing things soon after, as well as all of us starting to see shadows around the home. We were frightened. Most of the time, I would be staying home alone with my sister. During that time, I would see shadows moving, kitchen items would fall or be thrown. My sister and I would hear whispers. Then one day, there was a smell. Whatever it was disgusting, like something putrefied. We searched high and low for the origin of the odor, unable to discover the source anywhere. This continued for weeks until Dad decided to talk to the landlord. The landlord told us that the home's previous owner had been killed in the house. Since then, a lot of people who stayed there reported strange experiences, including the smell. My dad was furious. Soon after, we moved into another house. I still think about that to this day, though. I can't help myself.
I first discovered the Ouija board when I was 14. A girl was visiting from America, I'm in the UK, and she told us how to talk to ghosts. 8 of us went to her house and made a board with ripped bits of paper and a turned wine glass. 4 of us would put our fingers on the glass, and we would swap someone out every so often. This way we believed that it would eliminate anyone who might be pushing the glass. I'll add here that the finger that had been in the glass always felt cold afterward. Don't know if others have noticed this. The first few days were spent asking silly questions like, does so-and-so fancy me, or who will I marry, etc. On the 3rd day, things took a darker turn, and we started getting responses told to us without asking. It started saying things like, so-and-so will get run over, and X will die of cancer, and other really freaky shit. This scared us, and we stopped playing. Years later, in my early 20s, I shared a flat with my brother and boyfriend at the time, and bored one night we decided to do a Ouija board. So we made a board, as I had when I was younger, and set to it. It didn't take long for the glass to move, and we asked who it was, where they came from, and how they had died. It told us its name was Bill. He was an old hippie, and he had died from an overdose. Anyhow, things went on for a while, then my boyfriend, who was convinced that we were the ones pushing the glass, said if there's really a ghost here, prove it. I kid you not a second later, the lights went out. At that time, I had one of those old-fashioned meters that you had to put money in, so after my initial shock, I reasoned that I needed to put a coin in the meter, and stood up to do it. But before I got to the door, the lights came back on. Somewhat spooked, I sat back down and me and my brother put our fingers back on the glass. My boyfriend point-blank refused. The glass then spelled out, "Chilly trick, hey." After that, it kept going in circles and moving toward me, so I decided that enough was enough and said goodbye. A few years ago, after Facebook started and I got back in touch with my old school friends, I heard that one of them had died of cancer in his late teens. Not sure about the other prophecy, but I know that I'll never do a Ouija board again, and I firmly believe that we do tap into forces beyond our 5 senses. I come from the county where Ireland's most haunted house, Loftus Hall, is located. If you want to know the history of Loftus Hall and the original story to it, I'm sure you can find it on Google.
People that have visited all have their own stories of experiences at the house, and I'm going to share with you some of my experiences that I've had over the years. I lived about a 30 minutes drive away from it, so it was a destination that we visited a lot. I remember the first time I visited the grounds of the house. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old and was visiting it with my uncle. As we drove up the long lane leading the way to the house, I remember looking at all of the windows and getting a shiver as we approached. We parked and got out of the car. I stood and stared at the house. We walked around the grounds and around to the side of it where, at the time, there were apple trees. We picked some of them as they were red and juicy and put them in a bag to bring them home with us. When we got home and got the apples out of the bag, every single one had a rotten part on one side. I mean, a big, green, soft, gooey lump on all of them. Another time, when I was around 14, I had went to Loftus Hall with my friend and his mom. There's a nearby lighthouse that's open for people to visit, and we went there first. When we got to the house, there were a few people around, and a young American family there. A mom, dad, and 2 girls, aged around 5 and 9-ish. The 2 girls were running around and playing on the grounds when they ran to their parents laughing, and the 9-year-old said, Mommy, Anne wants to show us something. Can we go to her room?" Now this may seem like normal child behavior, but Anne is the name of the girl in the original haunting story of Loftus Hall. I must also mention that the actual house was not open for guests to go in and out of as they pleased. Not at that time. When I was 16, that was my first time going into the house. We booked a tour on Halloween night. There were some ghost hunters who do an overnight stay every year, and a certain amount of guests can stay there with them for the night. We arrived and went in. We set up our sleeping bags while the ghost hunter crew set up their equipment. We took the tour of the house at night with a tour guide and in groups of 5. We went to each room with the guide giving the story behind it. We got to a room called the Tapestry Room. This is the most famous and apparently most haunted room in the building. It's said that Anne was locked in this room, and she died in the room as she stared out the window waiting for her mysterious stranger to return. You can actually find the details of this story online. She was locked in there and sat with her knees to her chin, and when she died, her body could not be straightened. Anyway, we entered this room and it was freezing. One of the guests in our group, now I don't know if they were paid actors or not, but one of the guests in our group collapsed and went into a fit, arms and legs flailing everywhere. An ambulance was called, and he was sent to the hospital. Apparently, it happens often that people collapse and have seizures once they enter that room. The house is situated on a cliff, and the sea is in the background. About 4 years ago, we went for a drive down there on a foggy evening, and we were looking out to the sea. As we did, we saw the outline of a ship. It looked like something out of the Pirates of the Caribbean, but it floated through the fog and vanished. There have been hundreds of encounters regarding this house that are recorded. Everyone has their own experiences from visiting, everything from feeling queasy in certain parts of the house, to seeing ghosts in the windows, to meeting people while on tours that nobody else who was on the same tour remembers. There's also a hole in the ceiling that goes through the roof, and this is where the devil flew through to escape from the house. Over the centuries, this hole has been repaired multiple times, but each time it is repaired, it will only last for a few days and then reopens again in the same place.
I'll just start with some history on the doll. Was told this by the previous owner. She was bought in Monroe, Connecticut, about 30-ish minutes away from the Warrens Occult Museum at a second-hand store. The owner who bought it felt like something was wrong with it and would often wake up with scratches and have nightmares every night. So she gave it to a friend to sell it on eBay, the man I purchased it from. The man selling it had a few stories, like one for instance where he had family coming over, so he hides the doll in an upstairs closet so his niece doesn't see it. The family slept downstairs, and the niece woke up at 3 a.m. crying from a nightmare, and she described the doll he had upstairs. But she never went upstairs and had never seen the doll in person, didn't even know it was there. After that experience, he wanted to sell the doll and didn't feel safe with it, so he put it in a storage unit. The company he was using called him, asking for him to come and open the unit for them to prove that there was no animal or person in there, as the security guard had heard banging and movement in the storage locker at night. I am very interested in the paranormal, so I have a collection of Ouija boards, a haunted music box, and an exorcism kit from the 70s, so I decided to purchase this doll. When it first arrived, I took it out of the box, and all 4 of my dogs started growling very, very aggressively and moving backward away from the doll. To clarify, my dogs love everyone. If a stranger broke into my house to rob us, they would greet him with wagging tails and licks. This behavior was very odd for them. As I said earlier, I have an exorcism kit, and with this kit there's a cross that is almost locked in place with 2 pieces of metal. And around 30 minutes after removing the doll from the box, I heard a noise from upstairs. I went up to investigate, and it was the cross. The cross had been removed from the kit, and had fallen off of my shelf and onto the floor. I was the only one home, and all the dogs were downstairs with me, and my room door was closed. Ever since this experience, my family has been scared of the doll, so I put the doll back into the box, and sealed it with salt, and put it in the garage of my old house. I moved out with my girlfriend, and my family still lives there. I unfortunately forgot about it as I was packing in a hurry. I forgot to get stuff in the garage. After I moved, my mother moved into her now ex-boyfriend's house, and she put the doll in a shed. Not every night, but a lot of times throughout the week, they would look outside late at night, and the door to the shed would be open. One time when Logan went outside to close the door, he heard something move in the shed, so he went inside to check out what the noise was. When he was inside, he couldn't find anything that could have possibly made the noise, but he said he felt uncomfortable and cold, so he quickly went to leave, and just as he did, 4 truck tires that were sitting on a shelf fell right on top of where he had just been standing. Yes, this could have been a coincidence, but it felt like it wasn't, especially since the doll was also sitting on that shelf. After my mother broke up with Logan, she moved into an apartment and she put the doll in a closet. She's told me that nothing has really happened since, but when she's alone, she hears footsteps and knocks. The last few nights she's been waking up around 3 a.m. hearing noises in her room, but can never see or find anything. I'll be visiting her in January, and will be bringing the doll back home with me when I leave.
I was raised to understand and live in harmony with the paranormal. There were a lot of spirits and odd happenings surrounding me when I was younger. I've never really liked being alone in the dark, but I don't remember being afraid of anything supernatural until one night. I was about 13, and we had recently moved into my aunt's old house. I immediately disliked the house, and especially my room. They just felt wrong. Still, we set everything up. We put my 4-poster bed against the wall in such a way that my headboard was in a corner, and my footboard sat right against the light switch. So if I laid on my bed and looked down, I saw the light switch, doorway, and top of the footboard. I had a big window to my right, with a street light just outside it. My bedroom door wouldn't close and the hallway light stayed on. Anyway, I started to see shadowy figures during the day and night, but that was pretty normal.
I woke up a few nights to tiny footsteps and cackling. I assumed they were goblins being annoying. I always felt watched. The first night something seemed wrong, I woke up hanging halfway off of my bed. I couldn't see any light or figure out how I was even laying. Finally, I found my footboard. I reached out much further than the switch should have been and turned on the bedroom light. As soon as I touched the switch, I could see the street and hallway lights again. About 2 nights later, I woke up just in time to see a dark figure appear over my footboard. It looked like a man's head and shoulders with thick black material draped over it. There were no facial features, and the blackness continued like it had a body, but no arms or anything. When I think back, it reminds me of the Dementors from Harry Potter, but it slithered up over my footboard. I could feel the weight, and I could move, but it seemed like a bad idea. So I closed my eyes. I felt the weight continue up to my chest, pause, and disappear. I opened my eyes, and it was gone. I felt strangely better in the house after that, and I haven't seen it since. It was still one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had. I don't know what it was, or who it was looking for.
When I was younger, I used to be obsessed with ghosts and all sort of haunting shows. Now, I'd never particularly had a reason to believe that my house was haunted, but one day my brother came home claiming to have found $10 out of nowhere. I'll never know for sure if he was just messing with me, but after curiosity got a hold, I asked him where he really got the money from. Stupid me assumed maybe a friend? Perhaps he stole it from my parents' wallet? My parents never claimed to have been missing any money, however, something they definitely would have voiced being distraught about had they noticed that we had taken their cash. The story he gave me was that a young girl, maybe about the age of 7, had followed him onto the school bus that afternoon. He had never met this girl before, and had never seen her around at school, but she decided to sit in the seat right in front of him. After riding the bus for a while, she started to talk to him. Nobody else could see her, according to him, and the other kids were giving him weird looks. Eventually, she handed him $10 with a note, and then subsequently got off the bus at the next stop. I immediately assumed that he was lying and laughed, of course. I asked him to show me the note, which he promptly retrieved from his room and passed me a tiny piece of paper. A shiver ran down my spine, as the note wasn't in his handwriting. It read, "I'll help you, but only this time," which I believe was in response to the fact that my brother was begging my parents for a Zelda charm bracelet for months, which they refused to buy him. Given that he had $10 now, he could just buy it himself, though. Of course, I was extremely intrigued by this, even if it sounded absurd. I suggested we make a makeshift Ouija board to see if we could contact anyone. So we wrote the alphabet on a piece of paper and grabbed a necklace to hover above the DIY board. My brother was interested too, so he decided it could be fun. Mind you, I was in 6th grade and he was in the 4th at the time, so any sort of movement from the necklace caught our attention and we immediately thought that it was a ghost. After asking a few questions, the necklace began to move and shake. Either my brother was really good at tricking me by slowly sliding the necklace across the board, or it really was something paranormal. We were able to get a name. Kate. After asking dumb things like, "Did you watch me complete the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time?" and getting a yes, me and my brother decided to stop for the night after starting to get creeped out. We never said goodbye before ending. Eventually, playing with the board would be a daily occurrence. We thought we'd made a friend, and truly believed that someone was talking to us. Me and my brother decided to take things a step further and try to record something. So we both got our tablets, placed them in front of our TV, and hit record.
The first thing I asked was, if someone was here, move something in the room. There was nothing. Okay, well, maybe the ghost is shy? We decided to repeat the same question, but this time we said that we would leave the room and give it a minute. We went downstairs for 5 minutes, and when we got back up, our tablets had both fallen to the floor and stopped recording. Coincidence? I mean, things fall, especially when you're not careful at placing them. So we brushed it off. In December of 6th grade, though, things got really weird. I had started hearing voices in my head claiming that they were the ghost I was talking to while playing the Ouija board. I got so scared one night that I had grabbed the Bible that one of my religious friends had gifted me and would sleep with it. Eventually, I told my mom that there was a ghost telling me scary things. I won't get into detail, as some of it was a little graphic. She and my dad argued for a while about whether or not I was schizophrenic, and if I should see a therapist. So, out of fear, I never told them that I was hearing voices again, but I would space out often, talking and having conversations with this thing that I believed to be a ghost. Eventually, I forgot about the ghost, and we no longer talked. I will never know what that voice was, if I was genuinely insane, or if they were just intrusive thoughts. I was just glad for it finally to have stopped. Nothing necessarily paranormal has happened to me since, besides my TV turning on randomly in the middle of the night or feeling that someone was pushing my legs with some sort of unknown force every once in a while. I sum it up to just be my imagination playing tricks on me now, but I do still have this looming feeling that ever since I've played with that Ouija board, I have some sort of spirit attached to me, following me. Not a bad one, but just a constant presence. So I've been watching Bad Mood Rude, and she posted the sellers where she gets her haunted dolls from. I decided to get one for myself, and her name is Sandy. Some info about Sandy. Her husband was in the mob. She had alcohol and drug issues. She's nice and loves music. She also has PTSD. I've had Sandy for 3 days now, and I've already had some experiences with her. My first experience was her giving me one of her PTSD episodes. I think she was trying to show me how it feels for her. But how it started was my left arm got cold, and then it started getting pins and needles. My heart started racing, so I sat up in bed and started taking deep breaths, and I said to Sandy, "Wow, Sandy, that's intense, you're really strong." As in, her energy is really powerful, and from my right side, I heard a faint, echoey voice say, "Oh, I'm sorry." And eventually it stopped, and I heard her crying, because I think she was scared. I told her that she was okay, and to come and sit in bed with me, and crying stopped. To add, Sandy used to have fights with her husband a lot, and when this happened, my roommates, they're a couple, were having a fight. I heard them going back and forth through the vent. On the second day, I was in bed with my boyfriend beside me watching TikTok. I hear outside our door what sounds like heels walking on some sort of hard flooring. Note, we don't have anyone in the house who wears heels, and we have like plastic thin flooring. Hopefully someone knows what I mean. It went on for a bit, then no walking, and it starts again. I tell my boyfriend, "Hey babe, do you hear that sound?" Ironically, our other roommate in the room beside us walks out to go to the washroom at the same time as I heard the heels tapping, so my boyfriend thought I was just crazy and said that it was our roommate, even though he's a dude and very much doesn't wear heels. Today I did a spirit box, and Sandy came through giving me clear answers and in full sentences, and she likes living with me apparently, so I'm happy with that. Sandy is really great, and I love having her here. She always seems to show me her presence, but not my boyfriend, who's a huge non-believer in ghosts. And I really think she likes me because I want to help her with her PTSD, and instead of freaking out about the PTSD episode, I handled it and tried my best to get her to calm down. Every time I get up, I feel her following me, and it's like she's watching over me, protective basically. She had kids while she was alive. I really love having her in my home, and she's not scary at all. I know a lot of people are going to say negative stuff on this post, like, why would you invite a spirit into your home on purpose? And, oh, all spirits are negative. And to that I say, well, I like the paranormal, and Sandy is not negative. If she was, I would feel it. I would feel fear when she shows her presence, and she would be trying to hurt me. But she doesn't want to hurt me. Very clearly, she just wants to be understood and be known that she is there. She's honestly so sweet and motherly. She's just got some issues like any living person does, because she was living once too. I'm not a superstitious person, and I know that not all spirits are bad, and this is a PSA for everyone. Not all spirits are bad, but a lot of people like to assume that they are, and I don't like that at all. People like to only notice the bad ones and ignore the good spirits. Personally, I look at all spirits as good, but sometimes troubled. I actually laugh at this so much, but when it happens, I tend to just ignore it and be frightened. I'm agnostic, and I remember years ago that my friend used tarot cards for reading my future jobs. He said that I would work with kids, kindergarten, that I would work helping seniors, telecare, that I would work on a company that works with military fabrics, and at some point, at a church. When he said that, I laughed like, you have read it way wrongly, my buddy. Me, working at a church? I would burn before I put a single finger there. 2, maybe 3 years have passed, and I'm working not in a normal church, but in the 2 cathedrals of my city, which are famous all around my country. Everything was okay. My job partners are nice. I have a good salary, maybe some little paranormal behavior that we didn't really have to worry about. But due to COVID-19, one of the cathedrals has been closed temporarily. One of us goes there periodically to stay, watch, and wait for the vigilant guard. There are a lot of sounds, whispers, footsteps, light shapes, hard strikes around the place with no logic that scares me a lot. There are big doors that open and close. My boss told me that I had nothing to worry about because we were in a sacred place, so I tended to just ignore it. We also have a basement where the electrical installations are. We don't have to go down there, but sometimes we have. It has white and black tunnels. There are some rooms that were for wine barrels, but the whole of its interior space and the door looks like it was trapped in history. All of the little alcoves were also used for prisoners' cells, since at one point, the ruler of the Inquisition resided there. Everything always feels so heavy down there. The whispers are louder and more often. I always try to not think about it. I usually end up thinking that I'm just suggesting to myself that I'm hearing what I'm hearing, but after watch one day, on the cameras, oh my god. It wasn't really that scary to me, but talking about this to my friend and coworker that works as a guard, he showed me what the camera of the archive room was recording in that moment. Did you play Final Fantasy? If not, don't worry, just search how the souls look like on the game. There were a lot of almost the same kind of flames floating there in the empty and dark room. I was like, what the hell are those? Animas? Man, this isn't serious, bro. This must be a video trick or a filter. He responded with, those things don't hurt, but he suggested to me not to go into that room alone when the sun goes down, and if I have to, knock on the door and apologize for going inside. He said that they would disappear. Of course, he says that even if I go in, I wouldn't see them just through the camera, and that they don't always appear. The scariest thing was that one day I was in the bathroom and I heard someone come in and stand in front of my toilet door. I assumed it was the archivist because he likes that specific toilet, so I said, give me a minute and the toilet is yours, but I suggest you go for a walk. Haha. There was no reply, but someone took a breath very heavily, and a shadow was clearly under the door. George? I asked. Are you all right? Again, there was no reply, and the breath and shadow behind the door continued to stay there. Oh, I get it, Robert. Always trying to prank me. How'd you get into the church? Oh, you came with the boss. I started to be scary because the reply was the same. I started to get really scared because the reply was the same, but there was someone clearly behind the door, deeply, heavily breathing. I just knew that whatever I wanted to do, like if he was a thief and I tried to call the police, he would break down the door easily, and down there in that bathroom, there was not really a signal anyway. If something was going to happen, the best thing was to record all of it on my phone. I asked again who was behind the door. No one replied. I took my keys and put them inside my fist, and after I opened the door, I found nobody. Needless to say, I never went back to those toilets. It sounds dumb, but the only thing I can think to do in those moments is to mock them or tell a joke. I can't say that it works, but it feels safe. And let's add that since then, everything in the place is on silent. I don't hear singing, I don't hear laughing, I don't hear whispers anymore.
I remember around 12 years ago, when I was around 11 or 12, I stayed over at my grandmother's a lot to keep her company after my grandfather passed away. I was lying in bed one night. I had just turned the TV off to go to sleep when I heard a creaking sound outside the door, but I just thought it was Grandma going to the bathroom since she had to walk past my room to get there. Then, I heard the handle being pulled down, and again I just thought it was my grandma, maybe just coming in to say goodnight before bed. As I looked toward the door, I saw a large, white hand grip the edge of the door, and instantly I knew it wasn't her. I was too terrified to say or do anything, so I just kept watching as the door slowly opened. Because of the window at the top of the stairs outside the room, there was just enough light from the streetlights outside coming through to see what it was. It was a tall, slightly transparent figure. It just stood in the doorway for what could have been seconds or minutes, or who really knows how long. I couldn't look away, and I refused to shut my eyes, even to blink, but of course, I had to eventually, and once I blinked, the figure was gone, with only the open door as proof that it wasn't my imagination. To this day, I still don't know what it was. I told my friends before, and they said it could have been my grandfather's ghost, but it was way too tall and skeletal looking to be my grandfather in my opinion, and I felt a deep, sinister feeling from it that couldn't be further from the warm, loving person that my grandfather had been. I've had a few odd experiences with things before that I could chalk up to imagination or overreacting, but as they say, you have to see it to believe it. And after that day, I certainly believe. Ever since, it's had me wondering what else could be out there.
At my dad's house, I had this red-headed porcelain Victorian type of china doll with a green velvet dress. I was there for a couple of weeks, as opposed to a couple of days, which was usually the case, because I was like 11, so I had no job, and it was summer. This doll was always on the far end of my dresser, facing away from my bed. My room was set up with my headboard against the wall with the window, and the dresser was really long and ran along the same window wall. I honestly never really liked the doll. It always felt like it was angry. I don't even remember when I got it. I want to say it was from my stepmom's mom, or maybe from a garage sale. Both are likely since my stepmom's mom is Dutch and has a huge collection of weird baby dolls. None of them China though. But my stepmom also is a huge lover of all things garage sale. Like I said, I was there for a few days, this time a couple weeks. It didn't really bother me. The only thing that freaked me the hell out was a Furby that spoke without batteries. But then, all the weird stuff started. I've always slept with my door shut, and if there's an option, locked. I used to have nightmares about witches coming into my room, casting a spell on me, then leaving without me ever knowing. So if I didn't have the option of a lock, I would put something behind the door so that I would know if it was opened as I slept. Unfortunately, I did have a lock on my door, but I wasn't allowed to use it, so I always just put a couple socks behind the door. One morning I woke up, and the doll was turned toward me instead of away. I thought nothing of it, figuring that I had probably just bumped it, especially since the socks weren't moved. Again the next morning, it was a couple inches closer to my bed. I have always been a believer in the supernatural, so I was trying really hard not to get scared, especially since I'd had this doll for a while, and it had never done anything sketchy. The next morning, it was almost falling off the edge of the dresser, it was so close to me. I checked the socks. They hadn't been moved, so no one had come into my room. I threw her into a pile of clothes face down in my closet. The next morning, I checked the socks. Again, they hadn't moved, but when I checked the doll, she was facing up. Needless to say, it creeped me right the hell out. So, being the lovely older sister that I was, I gave it to my little sister, who would have been about 4 at the time. The next day, she brought it back to me saying, "I don't like it, it's angry," or something along those lines. I sat with this doll on my bed for a while thinking, what do I do? I've got this doll that probably wants to murder me, but I can't throw it out because it's good quality and my parents are huge skeptics, and I finally decided that if it's angry, maybe it was because nobody was nice to it. So, I took a Barbie brush and started brushing out all of her knots and frizz and tried to get some of the ringlets back to her hair. I cleaned the dirt off of her face, I straightened her dress, all that. I put her on my dresser afterward, and for 6 years nothing happened until, on one of the weekends when I was at my dad's, my sister asked if she could have it because it was pretty, quote-unquote. I guess she forgot the one time she did have it. I got a call a few days later from my dad, letting me know that my sister had thrown my doll out of her second-floor window and broke it. The next time I was there, I asked her why, and she told me that every time she woke up, that the doll was somewhere different from where it was when she had gone to bed.
My partner and I had just become parents, and were looking for our first home. We found an older house built around 1910-1920, which seemed perfect. It was next to a good school and close enough to family that could help out with our daughter. Everything seemed great for the next couple of years, but there was always a heavy type of atmosphere that was hard to explain. And we had this feeling like we were being watched all the time. My wife was the first to notice it, and I would always brush it off as if there was nothing to be scared of. I always carried that mindset, as I was highly skeptical of any type of paranormal activity, and I always trusted the whole "if you can't see it, then it doesn't exist" paradigm. How wrong I was, it turned out. The initial signs were that things would go missing and then suddenly turn up in the most peculiar of places, like photos and my watch, which ended up in the bathtub. But most of the time, things seemed to find their way into the wardrobe that was in the master bedroom. Once my daughter woke us up in the night to tell me that someone had just walked out of her window. As she grew up, she would complain that the man was in her room and she couldn't sleep. I was still not believing that this could be a ghost, so I would comfort her and stay with her until she went back to sleep, and I watched a black-like shadow thing, which I can only describe as darker than the shadows around it, move from the corner of the room and out of the window. I went back downstairs and sat on the sofa, where the deepest growl I ever heard happened, which completely took me by surprise, as it sounded as if it was right behind my ear. I nearly jumped out of my skin and thought I needed a drink. I went to the kitchen and I could hear laughter in the living room. I couldn't think of any logical reason for it, so I went back upstairs and sat in my daughter's room again for the rest of the night. But nothing more happened. Eventually, things escalated to the point where every night around 2 a.m., you would hear walking up and down the stairs so loud that we nicknamed whatever it was Mr. Boots. When my daughter was around 10, we would get massive bangs in the middle of the night. When it first happened, I honestly thought we were being burgled. I would run down the stairs only to find nothing, not a thing out of place. I had the plumbing checked and electrical, but all was good. Then, one night, I fell asleep downstairs, and an inflatable hammer flew at the TV, instantly waking me with the noise because it had a squeaker in it. I again was trying to work out how that had happened, and whilst I was thinking about it and looking at the hammer on the floor, it started spinning really slowly. I jumped up and walked to the kitchen, and again I heard the laughter. I then heard the boots on the stairs, and my wife suddenly comes down the stairs, woken by a really bad nightmare. While we were both talking in the kitchen, we heard the laughter again. Not long after this, we couldn't take it anymore and left. But I have hundreds of weird encounters, and I can honestly say that this house turned me into a believer. I always wondered what it was that was in that house. Ghost, demon. We still talk about that place now and then, and probably always will.
I was going to my sister's graduation in Binghamton University, and my family rented out a quote-unquote well-priced Airbnb for 2 nights. The only one that had 5 bedrooms, because extended Chinese family. It was a Victorian-era house, completely decked out with Victorian American aesthetics. It had trinkets, paintings of serious children, photos of even more serious people. It had ornate floral wallpaper, and dolls. Many dolls. We were picking out bedrooms, and no one in my family wanted the room with the creepy dolls. I'm not superstitious, and I didn't see the room, and I didn't understand the gravity of the situation, so I was like, sure, I'll take the room with the dolls. You see where this is going. As midnight approached, I got tired, even after being energized by a tiny bite of baklava and an espresso, so I was the first to go to bed. I went into the room and saw the dolls. They were locked inside a glass case, all facing the bed. I was like, okay, don't be silly. Also, you're a brave trans girl, and they're probably more afraid of you than you are of them. Because you're something they've likely never encountered before. Silly thoughts. I decided to take out my pocket knife and sleep with it at the nightstand, so that I would have some protection. I watched YouTube for a while, and turned off the lamp, and went under the covers. I felt the dolls staring, but my rational side told me it's all in my head. By 3 a.m., I was half conscious. I was slipping in and out of pure unconsciousness. While I was in a dreamlike state, I was aware of everything going on around me. The dolls just kept staring. Were they next to me? I was afraid to open my eyes. I blinked and I thought, it's okay, I have protection. I didn't dare look at the knife on the nightstand. I was afraid that I would see a doll next to me. Then I remembered, statistically, armed victims of assault tend to have their weapons taken away and used against them, and I thought, oh my god, I am going to be stabbed to death. Then I heard vividly, in a playful, childlike voice, it would be my heart's desire. I immediately became alert. It was like R2-D2 rebooting after being in low power mode. Adrenaline rushed through me. I heard a ringing in my ear as my awareness went from 0 to 60 in a split second. I stayed like that until the sun started to rise at around 5 a.m. That was when I fell back asleep. When I woke up, I dreaded having to sleep there again for yet another night. That night I thought, you know what? Violence begets violence. So I slept with my pocket knife in my bag instead. I fell asleep and slept peacefully through the night.
I was in Florida for a high school marching band trip. This was 3, maybe 4 years ago. We were marching in the Disney parade, so we got to go to all the theme parks, including Universal. One day we were in Clearwater. Myself and 3 guys who were part of my group were hanging out on the beach, far away from everyone else. Suddenly, I heard a deep voice say the word, "No." It wasn't a yell, it was nothing close to a volume level that would have made me look around. It felt like a thought that I'd have in my mind, yet it was very clear and very distinct. It shook me up for a second, but I didn't want to mention it to any of the other guys. After about a minute, though, one of them asked, "Did you guys hear that?" Instantly I replied, "The no?" It turned out that everyone had heard the exact same no in the exact same distinct male voice. Again, the nearest people were 60 feet away, and it was a mom and her kid, not a man, to begin with. We were on a beach, and it wasn't a yell, so the sound wouldn't have been able to travel that far. As a sound engineer, I can confidently say that a man, even with a deep voice, would have been unable to make a soft no loud enough to be heard from that distance. Nothing else happened, so while it may not be the most interesting or terrifying of stories, it made me go from being a skeptic to a believer. This is my one and only paranormal or unexplained experience. I was never exactly a believer, but I'd never completely disregarded the existence of the otherworldly. It happened a few years ago, sometime in the winter of 2016. I randomly woke up in the middle of the night, and the first thing that I noticed was how dark that my room was. It was supposed to be dark, as I had all my lights off and the windows closed, but you know, a little bit of tiny light from the outside street light always finds a way to enter from the edges of closed windows, like you can barely distinguish the pitch black from a slight aura, right? But there was none of it. It was pitch black all around. I thought it was probably a power outage, and I started to think random stuff like, probably this is what blind people see all their life. It must be sad. And slowly drifting back into sleep, when I was suddenly reawoken by the feeling of my bed shaking. I thought I had fallen asleep, and this is one of those sleep jerks that happen when you fall into your dream. But then more stuff started to happen. Soon after the first shake, there was a second one, which I felt much more clearly. A big rat had been invading our kitchen for a while, and I thought maybe it had somehow snuck into my room. But how could a rat shake my bed? Then, a few seconds later, I felt a literal punch under my bed, as if someone had punched the underside of my mattress right beneath where I was laying. I felt the mattress bump up in the center of my back. Oddly enough, instead of freaking out, I became extremely calm. And oddly enough again, I started to think of a logical reason. My mom made me check under my bed before sleeping, as she thought that some thief might have snuck into our home. She overthinks a lot. I thought that maybe someone actually had snuck in this time, but why would he disturb me instead of... And I felt another 2 consecutive punches from under me, right as I was having that thought. I froze for a solid minute, finally realizing that things might be abnormal here. Maybe I'm bragging, but after freezing initially, I went weirdly calm again, almost as if my brain went, "Oh no, it's a ghost. Anyway." There was a final punch, followed again by the bed shaking. I remember as the bed was shaking, I got up almost subconsciously, walked straight to the light switch on the other side of the room, and turned the lights on. There was nothing out of the ordinary. I looked under my bed with a flashlight. Also nothing. I should have freaked out here, but I didn't, which is really odd for someone like me who gets nervous and shaky for even the simplest social situations. My body worked almost on its own. I turned the lights off, took the flashlight with me to bed, and fell asleep as soon as I hit the mattress. And then it was morning. Nothing ever happened after that.
When I was around 12, maybe 13 years old, I'm 24 now, I was staying at my dad's house for the weekend. We watched movies and ate junk food, a usual occurrence when I got to see him. My brother was also usually with us, but this time he was staying with a friend that night. I decided it was time for bed around 11 that evening. I went for my routine, getting ready for bed. He decided that it was time for bed around 11 that evening, and I went about my usual routine, getting ready for sleep. I laid down and tried to pass out. I was restless this night for some reason, just feeling completely uneasy. My bed used to be vertical to the door with my feet closest to the door. I always used to sleep with my door open. I guess it gave me some comfort being able to see half of the entrance to my dad's door, knowing that he wasn't far away. Anyway, as I said, I just couldn't get to sleep, and frustrated, I laid there staring at my ceiling for a moment, and then felt as if someone were watching me. I shifted my eyes to the doorway, and a pitch-black figure was standing there, its head almost touching the top of the frame. I've never had an issue with sleep paralysis, and never have had it since, but then, in that moment, I could not move. All I could do was look at this tall figure that stood there, staring at me. Tears began to flow down my cheeks, and my heart felt as if it were going to beat out of my chest. I managed to barely whisper, "Dad?" And it turned its head sideways at me as if it were confused. I began hyperventilating intensely, which must have woken my dad because he came running into my room, and as he came through the door, the figure dissolved, as if a breeze came by, and it went away with it. My dad held me as I cried. I slept in his room that night, and for the rest of my stay there until I went back to my mom's. This event shook me to my core, and to this day, I cannot and will not sleep with an open door. I still have a deep feeling of fear, and almost want to cry when I picture that thing, and remember that night. For some context, I live in an apartment with 3 other people while we go to college, but it's currently just me until January since the others went back home. I was singing a song that got stuck in my head when I heard whistling from the kitchen at the same time to the same tune. I thought one of the other roommates may have come back early, so I shouted out to them, but didn't get a response. I went to the kitchen, which is only just a few feet from the bathroom, and no one was there or anywhere else in the apartment. I checked the hallway outside, but didn't see anyone or hear a door open and shut in the few seconds that it took for me to get to the door. The whistling was very airy, as if it was someone who couldn't whistle very well. This isn't the first thing that happened to me in the last few weeks, but it's definitely the weirdest. It could just be my imagination, but it sounded like someone was directly outside the bathroom door, whistling toward it. The other thing that happened was far less weird, and could have just been me not paying attention, but I came back from work to find that the lights in my roommate's room were on, and the fan was blowing out at the door. Even though no one had been home, and the other roommates' families lived quite a long ways from here. I asked where they were, and all of them sent back replies, showing that they were nowhere near the apartment. This story took place when I was a kid. My dad has been a pool man for many years. One of his oldest customers decided to purchase a ranch. I don't exactly remember where. He asked my dad if he could come and fix their pool, which was disastrously maintained before he bought it. He gave my dad permission to bring us along, and told us we were welcome to stay a few days to enjoy the ranch. We drove there, and I had been in charge of reading the MapQuest instructions because I never seemed to be able to sleep during car trips. We drove back home a few days later after my dad was finally able to save the pool. The drive home was very long. For whole stretches, the view was mostly desert, farms, and the occasional suburban town. Unlike me, my mom and brothers knocked out almost immediately. So most of the trip, it was just my dad and I talking or listening to music. I'm also a very avid reader, so I had a book on my lap beside the maps. I remember the ride had been quiet for a while because I had been reading. I had to stop because it was getting dark, and my dad only let me turn on the dome lights to read the maps. No radio service, and the Game Boy's batteries had all died. All I had left to do was look outside. All of a sudden, I spotted a very tall shadow on a roof. I recognized that there was a man who seemed to be wearing a hat, bowler or top hat, dancing and jumping from roof to roof of this suburban lot. It was kind of like the scene from Singing in the Rain, which at that point I had not seen yet. It took a second to realize that it wasn't a normal thing to just happen. The houses were separated in a way where a normal person couldn't possibly have jumped roof to roof. What scared me the most is how at the last house before a field he seemed to turn around and sense me. He bowed and tipped his hat. Even though I couldn't see it, I could sense him smiling. All I felt was dread. I turned to face my dad to see if he had seen him as well, but he had been paying attention to the road. When I turned back, I couldn't see the houses anymore. They were way behind us. I never saw a face or any details. He was just a silhouette on the roofs. I remember feeling afraid that he might follow us, or that he could if he wanted to. I never saw something like that on our many road trips ever again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it, but it felt so real. The memory is very vivid as well, which always comes back when I'm watching old musicals because the dancing reminds me of the way that he moved. Two years ago, I took my wife, my father, and son, then 3, to visit family in New England. They live on a small farm with buildings that date back to the 1700s, which have been restored and modernized. There's a guest house which was built around 20 years ago. My cousin is a prolific photographer, and my auntie had decorated most of the rooms in the main house and guest house with her photos. We didn't notice much about the photos in the guest house when we first arrived, probably because we were all jet-lagged. The next morning, after a sound sleep, we were sitting in the main family room eating breakfast and making plans for the day, when I noticed that my son was keeping his head down and not answering my father when he spoke to him, which was unusual, because even at that age, they were very close. I looked over to my dad, and noticed that he was sitting in front of a photo of a room in a rundown house. The room had a large window with sunlight streaming in, casting shadows across the length of the room toward a dark corner. I got an uneasy feeling from the photo, but didn't think much more of it. We finished breakfast and all got up from the table, and I noticed that my son was walking in a wide arc around the end of the table where my father had been sitting. Again, weird behavior, but I just dismissed it as a weird 3-year-old thing. Over the next day or so, I noticed him becoming more and more uneasy any time we were at the dining table, and doing whatever he could to avoid looking at that photo. I decided to ask him what was wrong, and he answered me very matter-of-factly, "The bad man in the picture is looking at me. He's very cold, and he's not nice." I looked back at the picture, and instantly got chills down my spine. There was no man in the picture, but I got the feeling that there was more to it than an empty room. I decided to ask my cousin about the picture, and she told me that it was taken at an abandoned farm a bit further upstate. It was one of her favorite places, but had always given my aunt the creeps, so it was moved to the guest house. Over the next couple of days, whenever I would ask my son about it, he said things like, "The bad man is looking at me. He doesn't like me. He wants to hurt me." I didn't think much of it, until we were going to bed one night and my son tripped and fell, seemingly for no reason, in the middle of the hall, and started crying hysterically. When I asked him if he was okay, he told me, "The bad man hurt me on the leg." I checked his leg, and sure enough, on the side of his leg, there was a large bruise that looked as if he had been struck with a blunt object. I didn't want to play into his fears, but asked him how the bad man could hurt him if he was in the photo downstairs near the table. His answer was enough for me to pack up all of our stuff and move to the main house with my aunt, uncle, cousins, and big burly housekeeper right away. He said, "He's not down there. He comes up here when we go to bed." I never found out anything more about the farm where the photo was taken, but I'm sure that there was some kind of evil presence around it.
I was a senior in high school, and I always hung out with my sister, who was 5 years older than me, and her friends. That night it was us siblings, her best friend H, who was the same age as my sister, and our friend G, who was about 20 and enlisted in the army. We thought it would be a great idea, since it was close to Halloween, to play with a Ouija board for the first time. We got a Ouija board and decided to turn off all the lights in the house and light a few candles to really set the mood. So we sat on the floor of the living room and started our little game. I was sitting between H and G, across from my sister. It took a while, but we finally got a response when G asked if anyone was there. The planchette slid to yes. We kinda giggled because we thought it was one of us. But then it started spelling out Mama. My sister and I immediately go pale and make eye contact across the board. Our grandmother had passed away next door, about a year prior to this. Before we could ask another question, the planchette spelled out the word love. We still weren't convinced. A little spooked, but not scared. G then asked the board, "How many children do you have?" And the planchette slid to the number 2, which is the correct number of kids that our grandmother had. It's important to know that G and H didn't know very much about our grandmother. They came into our lives after our grandmother had passed, so they never met her. The planchette then spelled out the words, "Roll Tide." Now we live in Alabama, and my grandmother was the biggest Alabama football fan. She would watch every game. The Alabama football catchphrase is, "Roll Tide." My sister and I immediately begin crying because it just seems so unreal, and then the planchette starts moving again. This time it's sliding around and going to the word goodbye. I ask, "Do you want us to stop playing?" And the planchette quickly slides to yes. My sister doesn't want to stop. She asks, "But why? We want to ask you more questions." And the planchette quickly moves across the board to spell out the word bad. That was more than enough for me. I felt like if this was my mama, and she was telling us to stop playing, maybe we should take her advice and quit while we were ahead. She said bad. Did that mean that something bad would happen? Or that doing that was bad, with the Ouija board? I don't want to find out. But after trying to convince my sister and friends, it did no good. The planchette keeps circling the board and going back to goodbye over and over again. Finally, everyone says goodbye because it's clear that nothing else was going to be discussed. But then, for some reason, I was talked into participating again. This time, when something answered us back, the planchette moved across the board even faster, but it was between 2 letters only. Z-O-Z-O-Z-O. And that's all it would say. I don't know what the others felt, because we really didn't talk about it much. But to me, it felt like the room became colder. It was then unanimous that we did decide to say goodbye. We were shaking. Whatever we had just spoken to didn't feel right. My sister and I decided to sleep in the same bed. I remember lying in bed and being huddled together and just looking around the room. Every sound made me jump. I swear, I could see dark humanoid figures all around. Maybe it was paranoia, but I definitely did not sleep at all that night. I kept thinking about how Mama, or whatever was imitating her, had said bad, like it was a warning. My sister ended up getting rid of the board shortly after. I'm not sure what she did with it.
I know her and some other friends tried to play with it again in a very old graveyard near our house with graves that dated back to the 1800s. While they were playing, they heard what sounded like footsteps in the woods around the graveyard, and what sounded like scraping on one of the headstones. I don't plan on touching another Ouija board again.
In August of 2013, I visited the small town of Clouderville, Louisiana, to investigate the cellar of a tiny, abandoned farmhouse. I was drawn to this place because in 1932, a woman was murdered here, and in 1933, her husband mysteriously vanished. While this situation alone was not of particular interest to me, the story surrounding it captured my attention. The following is the history behind the haunted candle of Clouderville as I have come to understand it. In 1932, the farmhouse was owned by Adam and Emily Benoit. Adam was a farmer, a hard man, and not a particularly likable one. Although he did run a successful farm, he was also an alcoholic and spent most nights at the local pub. His wife Emily was a quiet woman who had no social ties, and instead spent all of her time at home, alone. In June of 1932, Emily was found murdered in the cellar. Police records state that she had been struck from behind with a blunt object. They were able to determine that she did not die immediately. She had crawled from the place of impact to the back of the cellar. In her outstretched hand was a candle holder. It would have been the only source of light. Adam Benoit was naturally listed as the primary suspect, but he had an alibi. He was with his friend that night at the pub. The friend was a local drunkard with a less than stellar reputation, but nevertheless, Adam's alibi was accepted. The murder of Emily Benoit, to this day, remains unsolved. Early in February of 1933, Adam Benoit was reported missing. He had not been seen at the pub for several days, which was very out of the ordinary for the recent widower. Police investigation led to the cellar in which Emily had met her demise. The lead officer wrote that he had heard a man sobbing, but he found the cellar to be empty. The only sign that anyone had been there was a single candle burning against the back wall. The officer also wrote that upon extinguishing the candle, the sobbing faded. It's also in the record that the police officer found the word alone carved into the wall. The whereabouts of Adam Benoit also went unsolved. He was never seen again. The following year, in 1934, the farmhouse was purchased by a man named John Morell. When he was not seen or heard from in several weeks, police officers once again were led to the cellar to investigate. They found the exact same candle flickering dimly from the shadows. The officers once again reported hearing a man sobbing, and noted having seen the outline of a female form in the weak light. When the candle was extinguished, the voices stopped, and the woman's shadow disappeared. Once again written on the wall was the word alone, only written out 3 times, rather than just the one. Like Adam Benoit, John Morell was never seen or heard from again. The farmhouse to this day, still in his name, fell into disrepair. When I visited the farmhouse in 2013, I had every intention of exploring the cellar. The building had long been abandoned, so I broke the lock and cautiously ventured inside. I found everything to be completely untouched. Dusty wine bottles still filled the shelves. Old, rusty tools were piled in a corner. At the back of the cellar, I found a candle covered in dust and burned almost to the end. All over the walls of the cellar, across the ceiling, across every inch of surface, was the word alone. As I had expected, the word was written in two distinct styles, and I had come prepared. I compared the writing to that of Adam Benoit's journal, as well as John Morell's signature on the deed. I'm no expert, but the two styles appeared to me as identically matching the samples that I had brought with me. There's no way that this wasn't the writing of the two long-vanished men. In my curiosity, I lit the candle. Softly at first, then growing louder and louder, I heard the sobbing, the sounds of loss, of despair, the weeping of those abandoned to an eternity of nothingness. And in the shadows, the figure of a woman slowly drifted into view, dancing toward me. I quickly extinguished the flame and left the cellar. But of course, I brought the candle with me. The haunted candle of Clouderville has sat quietly in my collection for several years now. Only once since that day have I lit the flame. I was in my attic among my collection, and almost immediately I heard the quiet sobbing of poor souls lost in time. I snuffed out the flame. The next day, carved into a rafter in my attic, I discovered a single word. You guessed it. It said, alone.
I'm living in an older century 3-story house in a small town in Ontario. I was laying on the first set of stairs beside the front door next to my dog, I think taking his leash off for a walk. He's a big boxer shepherd full of love. Anyways, I hear this very loud and unusual sound, like something has come loose or broken. I'm home alone. I actually thought maybe it had come from the basement because I was so close by there. But then I realized that it was not, because the sound had gotten further away. I went up to the 3rd floor, which is actually like a split level with 2 empty rooms. Both remain empty since we've lived here, my wife and I. I go upstairs, not sure what I was expecting, but generally am a very logical human being. We have old bedroom doors with skeleton key handles, and when I get upstairs, I see that one handle is literally shaking up and down, almost vibrating. It didn't just go on for a couple of seconds. Remember, it carried on from when I went to check the basement and went upstairs, and now, as I was staring at it, it continued to vibrate. I grabbed the handle to make it stop, which it did completely. I opened the door to see nothing there and nothing in the room across either. We keep both doors closed, and the windows closed, and also the vents closed because we don't want heat or cool coming up to a floor that we don't even use. To this day, I have not figured out what caused this, and it hasn't happened since. Note, I don't remember any behavior from my dog. He may have been a bit timid, but he gets like this whenever my mood shifts to anxiety. There's one other experience that I had in our home. Our dining room is attached to the garage, and it is not a proper exterior door. It's another old, beautiful wooden door with a skeleton key and all. One day as I was cleaning, I shut the door just enough so that it was closed but not fully sealed, which I do this all the time. I went to my bedroom and heard the door to the garage swing open. Again, no other surrounding windows were open that could have made the air shift. Nothing was different than any other day when I do this. One other side note, my dog is terrified of our rocking chair. It's an old one that I had spray painted black. Never thought anything of it because honestly this dog is kind of scared of everything. He doesn't like certain flooring, which I'm assuming is because he must have had a bad fall at our old house or something, because even if I put a big piece of meat treat for him across a tile floor, he won't enter. And yes, we trim his claws, so I'm thinking it's a bit of trauma or a phobia. He's a big baby, so it's probably nothing but just another weird thing to the house. Any ideas on the shaking handle, though? It was aggressive, and even if something was in an empty room, something, say, fell on it, causing it to shake, why wouldn't it stop? Last night I was turning off all of the lights and getting ready for bed. I just had my flashlight from my phone to do some tidying up in the kitchen. I turn it off and go walk into the bedroom. Across from the kitchen, in the living room, there is a shadow. This was something that was different from the usual, as it clearly caught my attention. It was something that looked like a long shape peering in from the upper right side of the window, as if it was a long neck or just some weird shape, definitely abnormal. I was genuinely afraid, and kept turning the lights on and off to see when I could see it. It was only when it was completely black inside, and the street light and neighbor's porch lights were slightly illuminating the window. I tried to look out, but could only see myself in the blinds, and it really freaked me out. So I left the lamp by the window on, and after debating, I told myself not to wake my partner up because realistically it's nothing, and what could it be? I mean, we're on the second floor. It seemed really close to the window, and it wasn't moving. I'm not one to believe in paranormal activities. In fact, every time I watch scary YouTube videos that claim to be true and have paranormal shadows or movements, I instantly think it's not true and get annoyed. Walking tonight with my partner, I remembered the situation from last night. I saw nothing on the outside that would show through the window and create the shape that I saw. I quickly went inside with him to see what I could see from the inside with all the lights out again. I was expecting to see it there, and that it was something that I just never noticed before. But it was gone. The window looks completely normal, and the lights outside are the same as they always are. I'll never know what it was, and next time I will definitely be waking up my partner if I see it. When I was a little kid, I was pretty much fearless. I was out catching snakes barehanded before I was even in first grade. I got in lots of fights because I never backed down from older bullies. I once climbed up the outside of a 5-story building when I was in second grade just because I looked at the blocks in the corner and thought, I could probably do that. When I was in 4th grade, I lived in a small little one-horse town in Ohio, population 1,500. It was the kind of small town where everyone knows everyone else, and knows everyone else's business. When I was in the 4th grade, my older sister, by 2.5 years, and I went out trick-or-treating. This is back in the days when you could go out trick-or-treating so long that you would have to come back home and dump your bag out at some point before going back out. Everything was going completely normal, and we were having a great time in spite of the fact that she and I don't really get along that well. We came up to a house and knocked on the door. A woman answered. Before we could even say trick or treat, I was hit with such a wave of absolute terror that I immediately turned and ran away as fast as I could. When I got about a block away, my fear had subsided and I realized that I had left my sister behind. When I turned around, she was running toward me, about 30 paces behind. I was embarrassed to admit that I had been scared to death, and simply tried to pretend like I had run away because she did and passed her because I was much faster. I asked her, "Why did you run away?" She didn't seem to realize that I had run away before her, and looked bewildered and simply said, "I don't know, I was scared for my life." Having her admit her fear allowed me to admit mine as well. I had been in many near-death situations and more than once thought that I was going to die, but I have never in my life felt such absolute, complete terror. Neither of us had any explanation for it. This wasn't some haunted house on the edge of town. It was just a normal house on a normal street. The woman who had answered the door did not say or do anything that could have frightened us. She didn't look scary or threatening in any way. She looked just like any other average housewife that would have been in someone's living room in the town at that time. To my recollection, she did not say or do anything at all. She simply opened the door, and the minute we saw her, we were both filled with complete and utter terror. Again, I have no explanation for this, nor does my sister. I've always loved the paranormal. Even as a little girl, I found it fascinating. I've had a few encounters in the past, and my house is also haunted. But on to the first paranormal experience that I ever had. I was watching the 1994 version of Little Women with my mom and grandmother in my room when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye on my bookshelf where my dolls were. The air was off, but I could see that one of the doll's dresses was billowing around her, and one of my other dolls was reaching out to her. I brushed it off, as my mind playing tricks. I should mention that my mom rearranged them that day and had them all facing the same direction. Skip to the next day, I had walked out of my room because my grandmother had called me to ask me something, and I walked back in, and all my dolls were turned in different directions and facing different ways. I ran out of my room screaming. My mom didn't believe me until I showed her. She fixed them again. My room had always been off, and I had obtained more dolls from a family friend a few years later, and this is when things really got weird. I have 2 musical dolls, and they would go off randomly sometimes. I started to feel like I was watched, and I wasn't alone. But I just brushed it off as paranoia because I had never experienced anything major other than some of my dolls appearing to move every once in a while. Skip again to college, after years of dealing with minimal doll movement, something changed. I was in my room one night, and I felt something breathe down my neck, and it scared me so much that I didn't sleep in my room that night. My parents divorced when I was 15, and my dad was dating this girl who loved the paranormal and was also a medium. I asked her when she came over to check out and cleanse my room. The moment she stepped in there, she looked at me and asked if there was a doll in my closet. My heart sank because a family friend had given me a porcelain baby doll that was practically life-size, but it had no eyes. That was the one in my closet, and she confirmed that it was the one that she was getting negative vibes from. She prayed over my room, saged it, and I still have the rose quartz in my room that she gave me. I got rid of the majority of my dolls, and I don't feel anything in there anymore. This is just one of many experiences I've had and thought I would share. I still constantly check my bookshelf just to make sure, and it's been almost 2 years since I got rid of my haunted dolls. But I don't think I'll ever forget.
This is a series of events that occurred when I lived on a plot of farmland a couple of years ago. I was pregnant with my daughter, and my boyfriend worked late at night, so I was home alone a lot. Things were okay for a while, but as time went on, it started feeling strange in the house. I always felt like I was being watched while in my bathroom and the hallway right by it. I started feeling uncomfortable around windows at night. I figured I was just scared of being there alone. One of the first strange events happened while my boyfriend and I were in bed. While watching TV, I saw the door handle to our room slowly turn as if someone were about to open the door, but then it turned back. It caught me off guard, and I was trying to get my boyfriend's attention, but it stopped when he finally looked. Things began falling off the surfaces outside where my boyfriend would go to smoke cigarettes. He told me he would feel breathing on his face while in bed. He told me several months after it started happening, thinking that it would freak me out if he told me. He's not the type to jump to it's a ghost conclusion. After I had my daughter, I was even more scared to be in the house by myself. I even began locking myself in our room every single night. One night, I was waiting for him to come home from work. It was around 3 a.m. I heard the door handle jiggle as if someone were about to come in, but then stopped. I figured my boyfriend had to use the bathroom or something. After waiting for about 10 minutes, I called him asking why he didn't come in yet, and he told me that he wasn't even home. My friend came over to hang out with me and my daughter. I was changing her while my friend was in the other room. I heard someone say, "Hello?" And I thought it was my friend, but she said she heard it too, and that it wasn't her. I would get my friend to come pick me and my daughter up frequently when my boyfriend was at work because I was so afraid. One night, I had an overwhelming feeling of danger and had them come get us. I was taking my daughter's car seat out to their car, and it literally felt like someone yanked it down and out of my hands. I didn't drop it. I don't know how to explain it other than to say just that it was yanked or jerked down. I hated being in this house. I can't even explain the feelings that I felt all the time. I was just so terrified, and I'm so happy to be out of there. We moved away 3 years ago. On moving day, my boyfriend told me there were garbage bags at the top of the stairs that were placed in a way that they weren't going to go anywhere. But as he and his brother were loading up the last bit of stuff out the front door, he saw these bags come tumbling from down the stairs. My bland storytelling does my emotions no justice. I've never been so scared just to be in my own house every night. As soon as the sun would set, the whole vibe would shift. I thought I was crazy. I was getting angry and upset far too often over nothing. I honestly dread the idea of ever going through something like that again.
My father is a policeman. He's a no-nonsense guy who lives very much in the here and now and believes only in what he can see and feel or hear for himself. At the time of this story, he was in the police force for more than 20 years and I was a teenager. My father worked night shifts, and on a regular basis he would come home early in the morning to have breakfast with us. He would then go to bed, and we would go to school. He was usually in a good mood and would tell us funny or interesting stories from his day or night at work. At this particular morning, he was unusually silent, and he didn't eat either. My mother asked if he felt all right. It took him a while to actually answer, and he said, "I'm not sure what I experienced tonight." He didn't want to say any more in front of us kids, but we prodded him long enough until he told us the following. It had been a quiet night, and he was out with his colleague in a police car. At some point they were informed over the radio that a car chase was going on not far from them, and their assistance was required. They drove off toward the chase, and soon caught up with the suspect's vehicle. The radio had informed them that 2 men were in the front seat of the car. My father's car pulled up almost beside the car so that he managed to get a good look at the inside. He saw the 2 men in the front arguing heatedly with each other, and then he saw another man in the back. He had no hair and was so pale that he almost seemed white. He was dressed in all black. He looked directly at my father, his face almost pressed against the window with very dark eyes, and he grinned widely. My father was deeply unsettled by this person. He seemed to look directly into my father's eyes. My father was so sure of this third person that he informed the other police cars about him. The chase ended with the car crashing into a fence and the suspects fleeing into a field. They were apprehended only minutes later. There were 2 men, not 3. My father asked his colleagues at the scene if they were sure that there hadn't been a third guy. No one else had seen him. "I can't explain it," he said to us. "I saw him clear as day, and he grinned at me like death himself." This took place in 2004-2005 in Germany. To this day, we have no logical explanation for what he really saw and experienced. "
I want to preface this by saying that I am incredibly skeptical when it comes to anything about the supernatural. I tend not to trust anything without scientific evidence. That being said, these experiences I cannot explain away. Beginning in 2014, early 2015, I worked in offshore Louisiana and lived in St. Bernard Parish, where I'd rented a home. My younger sister and her 3 children were also living with me, as she and her husband were having marital problems and had separated. I was only home half the month because my job required me to be out for a week, then home for a week. Whenever I was home, my sister would tell me weird things were happening to her and her kids. She couldn't describe it, but had decided that it was paranormal, as many of us do when faced with something that we can't explain. She told me things were happening like locked doors flying open, then closing again. That if anyone was taking a shower, the lights in the bathroom would flicker on and off the entire time. I chalked it up to her having anxiety about being alone in the house. One night, as I lay in bed, however, I felt a weight pressing down on my legs. I assumed that it was my sister or one of my nephews. I raised up, half asleep, certain that I was about to see the face of a child staring back at me. Instead, all I saw was the concave indentation at the foot of my bed, indicating that something was on it. Whatever it was halfway on my legs and halfway on the mattress, as if it were straddling me. I was completely exhausted from the prior weekend, too tired to react more, moved my feet. As I pulled my legs up into a kind of fetal position, it did occur to me that moving them was difficult. It was almost as if a full-grown man were sitting on top of them. The room I was sleeping in, I had chosen because it had its own bathroom. Later that night, I got up to go in there and could have sworn that I heard a male voice saying, "Get out." It was immediately followed by a loud bang from the kitchen. Nervous, I tiptoed in the direction of the sound. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate, taking care not to wake my sister and her kids who were sleeping in a room close to the kitchen. She had also heard the noise, though, and had come out to see what it was. My garbage can, which was under the sink, had been thrown across the room where it landed beside the television in the living room. Seconds later, my oldest nephew came sprinting from their room, crying and screaming that someone was in there with him and had pushed him and his sister off of the bed. I ran to the room where my sister and kids were, hoping to see nothing. Before I could make it through the doorway, though, I was knocked off of my feet by an unseen punch to my chest. Suddenly, everything we had sitting on the island in the kitchen began flying in every which direction. I got to my feet, yelling at my sister to help me get the babies. With one of the boys in my arms, I ran to my room to grab my phone and car keys. As we entered, every single item that I had in the room was laying on the floor in a big pile. Books, bedding, even my television, which was attached to the wall. Needless to say, we got out of there fast. We completely moved out the very next day. While packing up our stuff, I called the homeowner and told him that we were leaving. When I gave him my reason, I expected him to laugh hysterically at me. He didn't. He wasn't surprised at all. I'm sure he's either been through it himself or had another renter prior to me who had the same encounters. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. My sister and I never spoke of it again. Anyway, that's my haunted story. Stay safe, everyone. I lost my dad a couple of years ago to ALS. It was a rough way to go. We were very close.
I'm an only child and a daddy's girl. We always promised each other, whoever went first, that we would try to reach out from the other side. There have been many ways that he's been in touch. Some have been more subtle, like giving me the strong urge to hear a song that's not my usual genre, country, but while I was deeply grieving, I suddenly had to hear Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. I always thought that was just a breakup song, but when I played it on Spotify and listened to it, much different. The lyrics are about losing someone, but that we'll be walking hand in hand again in the land that knows no parting. In the afterlife, in other words. I knew as I heard it that it was a direct message. Also, he came to me in a dream. You know the difference between if it's just a vision or a dream, and this was the only actual visit. For about a year after he died, the standing lamp in my living room would come on its own every now and then. I would just say, "Hi, Dad." One night while I was taking the dog out before bed, it was a full moon in February of 2020 about midnight, I witnessed a small rock being kicked toward me out in the street in front of my house. There was no wind that night, and even if there were, wind doesn't blow rocks, much less uphill. He always rather liked to kick rocks if he passed them as we walked the dog, so it seems like a dad way to reach out. So I said, "Hi, Dad." I kept the rock. But the most recent things left me with some very sweet keepsakes. First, he left an orange heart in my robe pocket. I don't wear my robe outside the house anywhere. I have no idea how it got there, just a little paper cutout of a heart. Orange was his favorite color. He loved bright colors. I said, "I love you too, Daddy." I taped it to my bathroom mirror to remind me that he is still okay and that he still loves me. Then, about a month later, my hubby and I were cuddling one weekend morning, and we heard a loud bang from the garage downstairs. We didn't realize what it was until later in the day. I saw the back door had been slammed open somehow, and had been open all day long. I closed the door and mused about how odd that it was that it had opened with such force when it hadn't been windy, and that there were no vibrations or anything. The next day I go to do laundry. The machine is in the garage, and at my feet in front of the washing machine is a yellow felt heart with sheet music cut out in a heart shape glued to the front of it. My dad was a pianist, and music was everything to him. It was a little dirty. I can't imagine where he got it from, or what it had to blow through to get to my garage door. I think he opened the door the day before so that he could get that heart in there somehow. It was just above and beyond. I don't know how hard it is to do that kind of thing from the other side, but I just feel so very loved that he went to the trouble and found a way somehow. I taped that one to my mirror as well. Lastly, on my parents' anniversary this January, Mom woke up to a light on in the living room. It was the light on the wall that used to hang above Dad's recliner, an old-fashioned looking one with 2 separate bulbs. He loved that light. He had it on a little remote plug and everything. When he got ALS, I put it on a smart plug so that he could tell Alexa to turn it on for him, until talking became too difficult anyway. But it stopped working with Alexa right after he died, so Mom hasn't turned it on herself since then because she has back pain and can't be bending over to rotate the little switch that's on the cord. After a couple years off, suddenly it was on their anniversary. She left it on all day. After an entire year alone, mostly because of COVID, I think she especially needed that sign that he was still with her. It was the first physical sign that she's ever gotten from him, and it's proof that love never really dies. Earlier today, I think I might have seen something, but I don't know. This happened a few hours ago while I was outside mowing my lawn. Quick layout of my yard. When you walk down my driveway toward the street, if you look to the left, you'll see a dead end, and if you look to the right, you'll see a big tree that you couldn't see through. This is relevant. Now, on to what happened. I was mowing the lawn inside my fence, and when I finished that, I went over to the part of my yard that was outside of my fence. After I finished mowing, I looked to the right and saw a pair of legs on the other side of the tree. All I saw was legs because I couldn't see the person through the trees. But their legs were all black. Like I couldn't make out any features. I couldn't see any pants or shoes. It was just all pitch black. I'm confused, and so I try walking around the tree to see who it was, but whatever it was ran away. It only took me 2 seconds to get to the other side, but as I said, whatever it was gone. I live on the corner of my block, so there's nowhere that a person could have hidden that fast. I've never believed in the paranormal or had any sort of experience, but I really can't explain what happened. Anyone who's had a similar experience and could possibly give me an explanation, I would appreciate it, because I'm still confused.
Ever since I was a kid, I had paranormal experiences. One intense rule of the house my mom gave me was never to participate in a Ouija board. When I was 14 years old, I'm now 20, I let my curiosity get the best of me and decided to do a Ouija board with a friend. In my room in the complete dark, we began the process. To my surprise, nothing happened. Later that night, I let my mind and fear get the best of me and decided to sleep with my mom, who had no clue that I had previously participated in a Ouija board, otherwise she would have killed me. As I was falling asleep, my mom asleep right next to me, I saw the silhouette of a large man in the doorway. At first, I told myself that it was just my brother. I called his name twice, then noticed that this figure was at least 6 inches taller than my brother and completely unresponsive to what I was saying. I started to panic and pray as I realized that this was not my brother and perhaps something far more evil that I had invited into the house. I was too afraid to move or to wake my mom. After about 5 minutes, though it felt like 10 years, the figure disappeared. I struggled to sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I was getting ready with my mom in the bathroom. Keep in mind that she has no idea what I had seen in her room last night, or even that I had done the Ouija board. She brings up to me a nightmare that she had had the previous night. After I asked her to tell me, the answer brought me to tears. She said that there was a demonic entity in the hallway, and as she went to touch it, it threw her across the room. As I broke down in tears and told her the truth, we proceeded to bless our house. I will never do a Ouija board again. Ever since we moved to our new house, I hear someone playing in my son's room when he's outside. Generally, I just wrote it off as something he placed precariously that just fell or something, and then I saw it. Or her, rather. I was sitting on my couch talking with the wife about whatever we were going on about, and when I turned my head back to look at my wife, I saw a little blonde girl in a white dress peeking around the corner of our hall entrance that leads to my son's upstairs room. I immediately asked my wife if she saw it, but of course she was looking at me when it happened. It was basically right behind her. Just the other day, I heard what I thought was my wife calling out, "Hey!" as she was doing laundry. I got up to see what she wanted, and she had no idea what I was talking about, and said that she didn't say anything. And she didn't hear anything either, even though the sound came from the area where she was, at the bottom of the stairs that lead to my son's room. Are there any Android apps or something that can help me communicate with the spirit that I believe is in this house? She seems playful, and sometimes I hear my son playing alone, talking to someone that isn't there, but when I ask him, he says he's just talking to his toys. 25 years ago, we moved homes. It wasn't in the greatest of areas, but it was better than we were previously. I shared a room with one of my 4 sisters. We had a TV in our room, but the remote control was broken, so we never used it. It stayed on Channel 5, the TV Guide channel. After a few months of living there, the TV in our room would randomly turn on every night and switch to Channel 33, which was usually Seventh Heaven or Full House that would be playing. No one in my family ever watched that channel. We didn't think anything paranormal about it. The house didn't feel creepy. Everything was fine aside from the TV turning on. Eventually, the channel would change to a station with just static, and the volume would turn on all the way. It would scare us and wake us up every night, so we unplugged the TV. Ever since the station had changed to static, the vibe of the house felt different. It was heavy, and my sisters and I always felt afraid, but we didn't know why. After a year living there, we would experience weird things. Lights turning off and on, random noises, hearing kids. Our aunt lived downstairs, and she was always keeping her room locked, even when she was home. One day my sister and I went downstairs to grab the vacuum, and we heard jumping on my aunt's bed, and her door was wide open. My aunt was at work, so we poked our heads in to see who was there. We saw no one, but heard kids laughing and the bed moving, once again as if someone were jumping up and down on it. A few days later, we were playing in the living room upstairs, and we heard a cough coming from down the hall. We went to check on who it was, because no one was home aside from my sisters and I, and we were all together. We saw a man in black pointing to my sister's room as if he wanted us to go. We were terrified, so of course we didn't. We stayed put until my parents came home. When they arrived, we told them what happened. They went to check out my sister's room, and there were scratches and crayon marks all over the wall and ceiling. We ended up moving out of the house when my aunt was sleeping with her door locked, and in the middle of her sleep, she heard the voices of 3 different men. When she tried to open her eyes, they were held shut. They choked her and laughed. She tried to scream for help, but she couldn't make a sound. She eventually passed out, and when she woke up, she felt as though she had been beaten. Her door was still locked, and everything was still in place. We thought it was sleep paralysis, as there were no signs of anything that happened. But later on that day, and within the next few days, there were bruises all over her body and around her neck. We couldn't explain what had occurred.
My university was in a remote location surrounded by a river. It was almost like an island, very isolated, and during the weekend all the locals would go home, making it more eerie. This happened in 2014 when I was 22 years old. My roommate had gone home for the weekend, so I decided to sleep in my friend's room. Around 1 a.m. I woke up feeling thirsty. My friend was studying, so I decided to walk to my room and bring the water bottle as my room was on the other side of the corridor. There was an elevator at the end of the corridor, which played soft music, and you would know if the elevator was on your floor. So I walked toward my room, and as I turned right toward the corridor, I saw an unknown girl staring at the elevator without moving. First of all, I didn't know who she was, because we can usually tell which year a student is, especially after spending 3 to 4 years in the same place and looking at the same faces every day. Secondly, the girl was wearing denim jeans, sports shoes, and was carrying a backpack as if she had just come back from her class. What's strange about that is that the hostel door closes at 8 p.m. The girl was looking straight at the elevator buttons without even blinking. The elevator was still on our floor, so why wasn't she getting on?
I could see the side of her face. It was a very strange stare. I don't know how to explain it. I automatically stopped walking after seeing her and got goosebumps all over my body. Something was stopping me from taking my steps forward. I stood there and watched her for about a minute. After that, I went running to my friend's room and asked her if she recognized the lady. When she came back, she wasn't there, and the elevator music was still playing. My friend didn't believe me, and I still don't know who or what that was. "25 years ago, I moved in with my cousin along with her roommate and coworker, Jose. The house was an old cement block, 3-bedroom, 1-bath. It had a large fenced-in yard where he kept his 2 very large German shepherds. The house was in Claremelle, Florida, in a crappy, packed, suburban neighborhood. Nothing special, rent was cheap, the house was clean. Everyone worked. We pretty much kept to ourselves. We might see each other for a few minutes here and there, but that was about it. I lived there for around 6 months. This is the story of what caused me to move out. One random night on a weekend, we all happened to be off work at the same time. We decided to invite some friends over from the pool hall that we all frequented. Jose also invited over some people who they worked with at the pharmaceutical lab. In total, there were probably 20 people at the house. We played music and did what young people do. After it had gotten late, we found ourselves discussing the subject of the paranormal. We all shared ghost stories. My cousin and I come from a pretty spooky family, so we had some good ones. Everyone was really into the topic. Jose, however, was quiet throughout most of the conversation. He waited until it died down, and then he said, "This house is haunted." My cousin and I shot each other a look, before proceeding to laugh because, yeah, sometimes Jose's 20-pound house cat would meow at the empty hallway, but other than that, there was nothing. He then told us that there was a presence, but that it mostly stayed in the shed in the backyard. He was referring to a tiny pink wooden shed that I had never even looked inside. He told us that he always kept the curtains closed in his bedrooms because his window faces the shed, and the door to the shed would not stay closed. He had jammed it shut 1,000,000 times, but it would always pop right back open, and that creeped him out. He said he could tell when it was in the house because he would always wake up feeling depressed. Once he finished the story, he wasn't the only one who was creeped out. I didn't want to think that I lived with a presence, and I didn't like the idea that it was hurting my roommate. I was a tough chick in my own personal opinion and was like, screw that ghost, I'll shut that door, and you won't have to keep your curtains closed anymore. I said this all because in my heart, I didn't really believe that anything was in the shed or the house. I believed that we were just messing around. So I told them all that I was going outside to inspect the shed and deal with the door. Everyone followed me, and while we were walking around to the outside of the house, Jose tried to discourage me by saying that it was a bad idea. That whatever was in there wanted that door open, and that I should just leave it alone. When we got outside, it was exactly what I had expected it to be. I looked inside and there was a busted lawnmower, some old paint buckets, rusty screens, and darkness. I looked around outside and found some rusty old shovels in a corner of the garage area. I took one of them over to the shed and kicked the back door into its frame. Next, I took the handle of the shovel and put it under the handle of the shed door. I shoved that into the ground. It was without a doubt secure. We all went back inside and talked some more. It was late. I want to say 1 a.m. by the time that everyone said their goodbyes. We let the dogs into the yard and locked the gate. We made sure that the front gate was secured so that they wouldn't get out. Then we straightened up the house. Eventually, we all made it to bed. Sometime around 6 in the morning, I woke up needing to pee. I opened my bedroom door. I was very sleepy. There was a weird sound as I opened the door that startled me. It was like fingernails scraping on something coarse. I opened the door all the way, and the shovel fell through the doorway and hit me. I can't even put into words how I felt in that moment. A small piece of dirt stayed behind on the floor. The shovel had been left there, placed, standing against my bedroom door. I rushed through the house to the side door, which was locked, by the way, and then out into the backyard. The shed door was wide open. Suddenly I felt as though I couldn't breathe. I ran back into the house. Immediately I pounded on both Jose and my cousin's doors until they both woke up and emerged. I knew, absolutely knew, that none of them had been responsible for this. And based on their reactions when I told them what had happened, that suspicion was doubly confirmed. Jose literally began to weep. He begged me to tell him that I was lying, that I was just playing around for a laugh. He then begged my cousin to admit that she had done it. When neither of us would take responsibility, he went to the store and bought a bunch of religious candles, produced a rosary, and started trying to pray whatever it was away. Or pray for me for being so stupid. My Spanish wasn't even close enough to fluent to keep up with everything he was saying. My cousin, quite the opposite of Jose, was absolutely peeved. She really was ready to fight me. She was adamant that I was screwing around, pulling some kind of a prank. She called me a liar, as well as a child, and that most of all, she didn't appreciate being woken up at the crack of dawn after a night of partying, only to be made a pawn in my little scheme. On my end, though, when I knew that neither of them had put the shovel against the door or reopened it, I was filled with pure terror. There was no way that someone else had gotten into that yard. They would have had to get past the dogs just to get to the shed, and then they would have had to get inside the locked house to put that shovel against my door. I didn't sleep there again without someone in the room with me. Every moment spent there after that night was beyond tense. We all just kind of stopped talking to each other. Jose and my cousin ended up in an awful argument, and she moved out within a week. It took me another 2 weeks to find a place to live. Whenever I did, I never went back.
I grew up in a historical town in the UK where there is a cathedral that's over 700 years old. For hundreds of years, people across England and beyond would pilgrimage to it. My family bought a house in this town and decided to renovate it. From the start, I had edgy feelings about the place, but being a generally nervous teen at the time, I put it down to me just being silly. My dad is a total no bullshit kind of guy. Calls a spade, has no time for the paranormal, spiritual, or religious chat. He thinks in terms of logic and realism and trusts what he can see and touch. My mom and him have had some heated debates about the fact that she has seen or felt unexplained things, and he scoffs at that. Basically, if anything spooky ever happened to him, I would believe it purely because he doesn't. I found this out years later. One night, Dad was woken up by the sound of hooves galloping. We slept on the ground floor, but nowhere near cattle or horses, so the unusual noise woke him up. He got up and left the bedroom to look for the source of the sound. He took one step toward the lounge door in front of him and opened it. The lounge door had windows that opened out onto the main road. Through the window, all he could see were rows and rows of heads walking past the house. The heads had gold helmets with red plumage on them, and they all moved toward the center of town, toward the cathedral. They didn't pay attention to him, but just moved silently through, just their heads facing toward town. We knew the road that we lived on was built on a Roman road, and he believed that these were Roman soldiers on horseback making their way to the city. Over the years, the land would have been built on and up an accumulated height. So in this day and age, all that you could see of them was their neck and head.
I had to have a Ouija board for Christmas. My wife refused to buy one, so I did it anyway. One night, when my wife was out, my daughter and I tried to use the board. Nothing. The planchette didn't move at all, or if it did, I could feel my daughter pushing it. As I suspected, it's just a parlor game. Move ahead 2 weeks. While working in the garage on a guitar amplifier that I was building, I had a very strong feeling that I was being watched. As I had spent many hours previously on this project without any sensations, this was disturbing. It got so bad that I couldn't spend more than a minute or so in the garage after the initial encounter without the hairs on my neck going up. Then came the whispers. More like a shh, shh sound, actually. Kind of a be quiet between 2 or more people lurking about. This only happened when entering the garage from the house, and later when my daughter called me at work to say she heard shh, shh when entering the darkened dining room. Since she was alone at the time, I blamed it on the cats. I too experienced it in the house, but usually only when entering the garage itself. Finally, I decided that enough is enough. I went into the garage one night and yelled at whoever was there that they had to leave because they were scaring the crap out of us. No more whispers after that. I wasn't yet into paranormal investigations at the time, so I didn't have a digital audio recorder to leave in the garage overnight. It bothers me now that I had real live spirits in the house to test with, and I didn't have the equipment or the moxie to do anything.
This happened many years ago, so I don't remember many details, but the experience still feels vivid. It is important to be mentioned that the bedroom where I was has a view to the backyard and the kitchen. So, my story took place at my previous home when I was 10. I was alone with my sister, who was 4 at the time, but later my parents came home after Mass. The TV was on and showing a comedy program, but I wasn't very interested. After some time, I noticed what I thought was a person in the corner of my eye. But at a second glance, I realized it wasn't exactly a person. It was a child with curly hair. The silhouette resembled that, and my reaction was nothing but freak out. I was losing my mind, thinking about going to find out what it was or call someone. My sister was sleeping, so she didn't know about it until I told my parents. After some minutes, I managed to calm myself down and wait in that room until my parents came home. Nobody believed me at that moment. And during those years, we didn't have any cameras or smartphones. Some years later, I found out about shadow people, and my experience fits with the stories told. I don't know what to think about that, but always remember that day, even after I moved out. I'm 23 years old and starting to remember this shadowy figure that would appear then disappear in my old family's house. 1 second there would be nothing, then the next instant he would be right beside you. He didn't have a set place in the house. He would always move and walk around the house, and you'd know it was him because you would get this feeling that you weren't alone. He'd be walking beside you or on top of the staircase, just watching. I have to add that he never felt evil. He was definitely not an angry spirit, more like a watcher. I also want to add that I describe him like a man because I remember him being very tall and his silhouette was a masculine shape. Other than that, you couldn't make out his face or anything else. He seemed like he may have been cloaked or hooded sometimes, though. He never did much, just came and left. Everyone, except my younger sister because she was too young, knew about the Shadow Man, but once he appeared to someone who was alone. I should mention that before I was born in 1997, that my great-grandmother on my dad's side had died of old age in the house. She had passed away in the back bedroom, which became me and my brother's room when my younger sister was born. My dad was with her on that night, and says that she saw something. He walked out of the room and came back, and she was dead. Anyways, my parents got married and we moved in 2012, and I haven't seen the Shadow Man since. Whenever I think about it, though, or hear similar stuff, all the hair on my body stands up, and my right eye drops a single tear, every time, without fail. It's even happening as I type. I try to control it, but I can't. I've had other supernatural encounters, and this always happens. My birthday was on April 14th and I had just turned 12, so there were multiple balloons on the floor where this happened. It was around 3:30 a.m. on Sunday, and my family was asleep, but I was playing with my new birthday present, a Nintendo Switch, in my bedroom. I heard a loud pop sound coming from the kitchen. It sounded like a balloon, but louder and sort of more aggressive, if that makes sense. I put down my Nintendo Switch and tell the girl that I was playing with that I would be right back. I opened my bedroom door and headed to the living room to explore the cause of this noise. I saw a deflated balloon in the same spot where it was earlier. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a misty white apparition in the shape of a woman, maybe about 4 feet tall, seated on my dad's sheepskin chair. I felt extremely cold, and an inexplicable feeling washed over me. The best way I can describe it is an overwhelming feeling of dread. I really wanted to go back to the safety of my own room, so I turned around and went back inside. I was playing with my friend and it was around 4:15 a.m. when I heard another noise coming from the living room. It was the sort of sound that you hear when something falls on glass but doesn't break it. Being scared as hell, I decided not to explore, as the sun was rising and I was getting ready for online school, and I go to the living room and the second noise happened. I see a framed picture lying face down on the ground. The picture is of my grandma who died in 2009, holding me as a baby.
Last night I was laying in bed trying to sleep. My room is already a nice, cool temperature due to my air conditioner. However, it feels as though out of nowhere the temperature drops 10 more degrees. I find this a bit strange, but I don't really mind it. Then suddenly, I feel what I think is a touch, like something is touching me around my neck and chest, as well as pressure building on those areas. I simply try not to ignore it and go to sleep. The cold and sensations of touch are a mere annoyance at this point, but that's when I saw it. I looked over my bed to the door, and there it was. A large, lanky shadow figure standing there with yellow eyes. It was only there for a second, but it still managed to scare me. Luckily, I was able to sleep, and as a precaution, I now have a bowl of salt in my room.
as I hear it repels evil spirits and possibly demons. I live in an old house that was made during the 70s. When I moved in, everything was fine, until last week. Last week I was home chilling on my bed reading a book when I heard a noise from the room next to mine. This room is where I keep old possessions from my grandma in the closet. There was one that always crept me out. Some old doll. The noise sounded like a bang, like a closet door being slammed. I went into the room to check and found the closet door wide open with stuff all over the floor. That doll was sitting there. It was sitting there looking at me. I am so freaking terrified right now.